you. In this video, we're gonna explain about why Russia and Ukraine have a conflict, start from the background of the conflict, and then we will explain about the United Nations response to this conflict, and also we can see the impact of what if the UN get involved of this conflict. And in the end, we're gonna give the conclusion, and also we're gonna talk about some of the possible scenario that might be planning for this conflict. And then let's check out.
After weeks of warnings, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has begun. Russia's President Vladimir Putin has cast aside international condemnation to launch the attack in
the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
On February 21, 2022, Russian President Vladimir Putin gave a bizarre and at times unhinged speech laying out a long list of grievances as the justification for the special military operation. And on February 24, 2022, Russia invades Ukraine. So how this happened? First, Ukraine and Russia are two dependent countries, which emerged with the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. But as a former Soviet republic, Ukraine has deep social, cultural, and economic ties with Russia. And until today, Russia considers that Ukraine is a part of Russia and they are one. On one of his speeches, Vladimir Putin said that we're not just close neighbors, we are one nation. But the fact is, Ukraine is a sovereign nation with its own language, culture, and political system. Second is, the relationship between these two heats up when Ukraine became a NATO partner in 1994, and in 2030, Ukraine were going to sign an association agreement with European Union. But Ukraine pro-Russian government refused and made hundreds of protests took the street and demanded the agreement be signed. From this incident, Ukraine president at the time, Viktor Yanukovych, got dismissed, and this meant Putin lost political influence over Ukraine. In 2014, Putin decided to use force and invaded and annexed Crimean Peninsula. Russian President Vladimir Putin cited the need to protect the rights of Russian citizens and Russian speakers in Crimea and cited Ukraine. Russia then formally annexed the peninsula after Crimeans fought to join the Russian Federation in dispute local referendum. This crisis heightened ethnic division, and 2 months later pro-Russian separatists in Donetsk and Luhansk regions of eastern Ukraine held a referendum to declare independence from Ukraine. Armed conflict in the region quickly broke out between Russian-backed forces and Ukrainian military. Beginning in February 2015, France, Germany, Russia, and Ukraine attempt to kickstart negotiations and broker a cessation to violence through the Minsk Accords. The agreement framework includes provision for the ceasefire, withdrawal of heavy weaponry, and full Ukrainian government control throughout the conflict zone. However, efforts and reached diplomatic settlement and satisfactory resolution were largely unsuccessful. In April 2016, NATO announced that the alliance would deploy 4 battalions to Eastern Europe, rotating troops through Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland to deter possible future Russian aggression elsewhere in Europe, particularly in Baltics. In September 2017, the United States also deployed 2 U.S. Army tank bridges to Poland to further bolster NATO's presence in the region. In January 2018, the United States imposed the new sanction on 21 individuals, including a number of Russian officials and 9 companies linked to the conflict in eastern Ukraine. In March 2018, the State Department approved the sale of anti-tank weapons to Ukraine. The first sale is lethal weaponry since the conflict began. In October 2018, Ukraine joined the United States and 7 other NATO countries in a series of large-scale air exercises in western Ukraine. The exercise came after Russia held an annual military exercise in September 2018, the largest since the fall of the Soviet Union. Throughout 2021, Russia increased the number of troops close to Ukraine as President Putin warned the West against the expansion of NATO. The Russian leader's initial aim was to overrun Ukraine and depose the government, ending for good to desire to join the Western Defensive Alliance see NATO. In October 2021, Russia began moving troops and military equipment near its border with Ukraine, raising concern over a potential invasion. By December, more than 100,000 Russian troops were in place near the Russia-Ukraine border, and US intelligence officials warned that Russia may be planning an invasion for early 2022. In this case, there's no mandate from United Nations for this conflict yet. United Nations condemned Russia to stop the invasion to Ukraine. United Nations expect a resolution for Russia to leave Ukraine, stop seizing separatist areas, and respect the UN Charter. The resolution also asks Russia to follow Article 2 of the UN Charter, which prohibits member states from violating the territorial integrity of other countries by using force, and cancel Russia's recognition of two separatist states in the eastern Ukraine as independent states. But the settlement through the UN Security Council will also not produce results, considering that in the UN Security Council there is Russia, which is permanent member with veto power, so that Russia can veto the draft resolution from UN Security Council. So the only open attempt for peaceful settlement is through the UN General Assembly, that there is no veto power and all member states have the same vote.
After understand about the background and the main issue about the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and is there any solution from the UN to end this conflict, and what the impact for this conflict if the UN get involved, we're gonna move on to this section where we're gonna talk about is there any peacekeeping mission from the UN to end this conflict between Russia and Ukraine. As for today, there are no peacekeeping mission in Ukraine, but there are considerations that some of Ukraine's allies would deploy peacekeepers into the conflict. There have been on and off discussion of peacekeeping in Ukraine since the initial crisis over Crimea and Donbass 8 years ago, although today's war has rendered most previous proposals irrelevant. The Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe launched its special monitoring mission in Ukraine in 2014 during the initial turmoil over Russia's occupation of Crimea. The special monitoring mission was an armed civilian mission involving 140,000 international and local staff. The special monitoring mission was an armed civilian mission involving 140,000 international and local staff. At its peak, what gained a solid reputation for impartial report on the fighting. It also succeeded in negotiating local truce to allow authorities to undertake tasks such as repairing water supply infrastructure. But the Ukrainian officials and their allies also sought to gauge interest in proposals for a more robust international presence. Former Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko floated the idea of a UN force in Donbass in 2015. There was a brief moment of excitement in Kyiv and Western capitals in 2017 when Russian President Vladimir Putin indicated that he might also be open to a UN mission in Ukraine, although Russian diplomats in New York followed up with only a thin proposal for lightly armed UN guards to accompany special monitoring missions. Monitors. The Trump administration pursued talks with Russia on option for a UN deployment in 2018, and a number of conflict resolution organizations, including Crisis Group, developed proposals for what such a mission might look like in 2017 and 2018. Some were distinctly ambitious, envisaging forces of 20,000 or more troops and allies under UN command, or at least with a UN mandate in Donbass to oversee reintegration of the self-declared Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics into Ukraine. So we're finally in the last section of this video where we're gonna talk about the conclusion about this topic. So Vladimir Putin unleashed the biggest war in Europe since World War II, with the justification that modern Western-leaning Ukraine was a constant threat and Russia could not feel safe, develop, and exist. Thousands of people have since died. Towns and cities such as Mariupol lie in ruins, and 13 million people have been displaced. The Russian leader's initial aim was to overrun Ukraine and depose its government, ending for good its desire to join the Western Defensive Alliance NATO. After a month of failures, he abandoned his bid to capture the capital Kyiv and turned his ambition to Ukraine's east and south. Launching the invasion on 24 February, Putin told the Russian people his goal was to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. His declared aim was to protect people subjected to what he called 80 years of bullying and genocide by Ukraine's government. Another objective was to aid ensuring Ukraine's neutral status. Amid the fog of war, it can be hard to see the way forward. The news from the battlefield, the diplomatic noises of the emotion of the grieving and displaced, all of this can be overwhelming. So let us step back for a moment and consider how the conflict in Ukraine might play out. What are some of the possible scenarios that politicians and military planners are examining? Few can be predict the future with confidence, but there are some potential outcomes. Most are bleak. Amid the fog of war, it can be hard to see the way forward. The news from the battlefield, the diplomatic noises of the emotion of the grieving and displaced, all of this can be overwhelming. So let us step back for a moment and consider how the conflict in Ukraine might play out. What are some of the possible scenarios that politicians and military planners are examining? Few can be predict the future with confidence, but here are some potential outcomes. Most are bleak. The first scenario was a short war. Under this scenario, Russia escalates its military operation. There are more indiscriminate artillery and rocket strikes across Ukraine. The Russian Air Force, which has played a low-key role so far, launches devastating airstrikes. Massive cyber attacks sweep across Ukraine, targeting key national infrastructure. Energy supplies and communication networks are cut off. Thousands of civilians die despite brave resistance. Kyiv falls within days. And the second scenario was long war. Perhaps more likely is that this develops into a protracted war. Maybe Russian forces get bogged down, hampered by low morale, poor logistics, and inept leadership. Maybe it takes longer for Russian forces to secure cities like Kyiv, whose defenders fight from street to street. And the third scenario was European war. Might it be possible this war could spill outside Ukraine's border? President Putin could seek to regain more parts of Russia's former empire by sending troops into ex-Soviet republics like Moldova and Georgia that are not part of NATO, or there could be just miscalculation and escalation. And the fourth scenario was diplomatic solution. Might there, despite everything, still be a possible diplomatic solution between this? And the guns are talking now, but the path of dialogue must always remain open, said UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres.